Most people never asked his name. They called him the cleaner, if they called him anything at all. A few just waved a limp hand as they passed by in the late hours, the glow of their desktop screens still humming as they packed up briefcases, grabbed half-full lattes, and mumbled something about a late Uber. But his name was Mateo Ruiz, and for 10 years he had wiped down the glass conference tables in that high-rise downtown, vacuumed the tracks of the elevators where the executives dragged their designer, shoes, and scrubbed the restrooms until the scent of bleach clung to his skin like a second layer. No one noticed when he arrived, but everyone noticed if the trash bins weren't emptied by 7 a.m. "Hey!" That voice again, shrill, clipped. Ms. Langston from HR, the one who wore 6-inch heels just to look over everyone's heads. "You missed the corner office again," she said, pointing as if he hadn't been doing this exact route every night for longer than she'd been alive. "There's still water streaks on the glass. Our VP has clients in at 9 a.m. You can't leave it looking like this." Mateo stood with the spray bottle still in his hand, his gloved fingers damp beneath the plastic. "I haven't gotten to that one yet," he said calmly. "It's next on the rotation." Langston frowned like she'd tasted something bitter. "Well, pick up the pace. This isn't your little shop back home." He didn't answer her. He never did when she said things like that. He just turned back to his cart, rolled it forward, and went on with the job. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that Mateo had a degree in structural engineering from the University of Bogotá. That before he came to the US, he'd helped build schools in the outskirts of Medellin. That he only took the cleaning job because his work visa didn't recognize foreign credentials, and the bills didn't pause for pride. But pride was something he kept in his pocket, like a folded photograph. Hidden, but always with him. Every night after clocking out at 2 a.m., Mateo would walk 3 blocks to the 24-hour diner on Marston Street, booth by the window coffee black. And there, under the flickering lamp and the sound of jazz on the radio he'd study, business law, property valuation, tax strategy. Because 5 years ago, Mateo started something they never expected. He formed an LLC, Ruiz Ventures it was called, 2 words that no one in that office had ever seen typed into a browser. But it was real. He'd already bought a duplex in Eastwood, then a triplex in Crescent Bay, then a small storage unit facility outside the city, and every time he earned more than he needed, he socked it away. Not in flashy cars, not in new clothes, but in the numbers, spreadsheets, compound interest, and deeds. At work, they saw the mop. Outside work, he saw the skyline. That night, as he left the office, he paused outside the glass front doors, the very same ones he polished every Tuesday. He looked up at the sleek black building, 22 stories tall, with the name LangCorp Tower glowing at the top in white LED. He took out a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. On it was a list of commercial buildings quietly going into auction by the bank, and LangCorp Tower was circled in red. The email had come quietly, no dramatic headers, no bold font urgency, just a plain subject line in Mateo's inbox. Notice of foreclosure auction, 4701 West Fremont Ave. That was the address. The gleaming tower he vacuumed every night. LangCorp Tower. He read it 3 times before leaning back in the booth at the diner. Outside, dawn was trying to pull itself over, the sleeping city like a thin blanket. He took a slow sip of lukewarm coffee, eyes locked on the glowing screen, feeling something between fear and fire build in his chest. They had no idea. The layoffs, the hush-hush downsizing, the clients that hadn't renewed. Mateo had overheard it all while scrubbing fingerprints from boardroom doors and emptying bins filled with shredded quarterly reports. He knew before the mailroom did that LangCorp was bleeding cash. What they didn't know was that the bank had already made its move. A quiet foreclosure, private auction, undervalued for speed, and Mateo was ready. For 10 years, he'd been preparing, like a soldier in plain clothes, saving half of every paycheck. Driving the same 2003 Camry, learning how to build a portfolio not just of properties, but of leverage. Ruiz Ventures now had enough equity to take a swing, a real one. He tapped the link in the email. Commercial property auction, LangCorp Tower, starting bid, $3.2 million. Others would see risk. He saw memory. He saw the first night he mopped the marble lobby alone, stomach growling, afraid someone would hear him humming boleros to stay awake. He saw the Christmas party 2 years ago, when he offered to help clear the catering tables and was told, just go out the service elevator like always. He saw the time one of the partners, Mr. Halverson, handed him a half-eaten sandwich and said, "You folks don't mind leftovers, right?" Mateo didn't flinch then. He just took the plate, dumped it quietly, and walked back to the janitor's closet where he'd been stashing printouts of building blueprints and zoning maps for weeks. Yes, he was ready. 2 days later, courthouse. Basement 901. The auction was being held in a wood-paneled conference room with bad lighting and silent cold air. The kind of place where fortunes changed in whispers. Mateo sat near the back, wearing a grey sweater and clean jeans. No one noticed him when he walked in. No one ever did. Rows of property managers, legal reps, and middle-aged investors tapped at their phones while sipping burnt coffee. Mateo's fingers rested on a slim folder. Inside, letters of credit, pre-approved financing, his LLC registration, and a notarized check from Ruiz Ventures. When they called the property name, no one. To moved, the auctioneer raised an eyebrow. LangCorp Tower. Opening bid $3.2 million. Do I hear a bid? Silence. Then 3.2, Mateo said, his voice firm, rising like a clear bell through the basement air. Heads turned. One man near the front chuckled. The auctioneer blinked. 3.2 million. From Ruiz Ventures. LLC, Mateo answered. Another pause. A broker 2 rows up raised a paddle lazily. 3.3. Mateo didn't hesitate. 3.4. The room shifted. Some began murmuring. Who was this guy? Another bid. 3.5. 3.6. The broker squinted back at him. You're serious? Mateo looked at him square in the eye. More than you know. The man hesitated. His phone buzzed. He checked something, swore under his breath, then put his paddle down. The auctioneer waited. Going once, going twice. Sold to Ruiz Ventures, LLC. Just like that, it was his. That night, Mateo returned to the building. Same time, same jacket, same slow push of the janitor's cart. The night security guard buzzed him in like always. The clipboard said he was still scheduled to clean floors 11 through 15. He took the elevator alone. But instead of heading for the utility closet, he stepped out onto the 20th floor. Executive, wing, reserved for the highest-ranking partners. He stood there for a long moment, looking out the same glass window he used to wipe down with vinegar spray. The skyline blinked quietly back at him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a fresh key card. A new access, new titled owner downstairs, no one knew. Not yet, but by Monday morning, they would. The lobby smelled the same, lemon floor polish and corporate denial. The same receptionist sat behind the marble desk, tapping her nails against the phone as she scrolled Instagram on the side. She didn't look up when Mateo entered. She didn't have to. To her, he was invisible. He wore the same grey zip-up, the same dark pants, the same plain shoes. The only difference was the envelope in his hand, thick, official, corner-stamped with the Ruiz Ventures insignia. The same logo now registered with the city's property office, the same one the LangCorp leasing team had yet to notice. Mateo approached the front desk. She finally glanced up. Her expression flickered with surprise, then irritation. "You're not scheduled for this shift. I'm not here for janitorial work," he said simply, placing the envelope on the counter. "This is for your managing director." She narrowed her eyes at the logo. "What is this?" "A change in ownership," he said, "effective immediately." Before she could form a response, he turned and walked toward the elevators, the front elevators, the ones he'd never been allowed to use before, the ones he used to polish from the outside, waiting until no one was around to sneak in a few minutes early to stay ahead of schedule. "Now?" He tapped the new black card against the panel. A soft chime. The doors opened. Inside, a businessman in a sharp suit frowned at him as he stepped in. "You lost?" the man asked. Mateo didn't answer, just pressed the button for the 22nd floor, the one marked Executive Conference. The man snorted. "You'll need credentials for that." Mateo turned to him with a calm nod. "I have them." The elevator rose, silent, tense. Mateo stood still, his hands folded, the card still glowing faintly in the reader's slot. When the doors opened, the man blinked as Mateo stepped out. He didn't follow. He just stood there, confused, as the doors closed again. Conference room A, 8:04 a.m. The partners were gathering. Halverson was already seated at the head of the table, slumped in his leather chair with his usual smirk. He looked older than last year, more grey, more creased, but just as arrogant. Langston entered with 2 coffees, passing one to her assistant. "Can you believe the building Wi-Fi is still garbage? It's like we're in a basement bunker," the fees. Others murmured about clients, about late payments, about layoffs. And then the door opened. Mateo stepped inside. They all froze. A janitor in the executive room, unscheduled, unannounced. Halverson scoffed. "We don't need cleanup right now, Ruiz." Langston rolled her eyes. "Did no one lock the service stairwell again?" Mateo didn't flinch. He walked to the front of the room and placed a set of printed documents on the table, real estate filings, bank confirmations, title transfer forms. Then he looked Halverson in the eye. "You're not my employer anymore," he said evenly. Silence. Langston frowned. "What?" Mateo turned toward her, then toward the room. "As of Friday, Ruiz Ventures acquired full ownership of this building. At auction, I'm your landlord." You could hear the HVAC humming, nothing else, he continued. "This floor, along with 5 others you've neglected, is now under review. All existing leases are being restructured, including your own." "You can't be serious," Halverson said, eyes scanning the documents. "This is a joke." Mateo looked at him calmly. "It's not. But your maintenance payment history?" "That is," Langston sputtered, stepping forward. You clean the floors. You don't even... What is this, some scam LLC?" Mateo pulled a copy of the state-registered business license from the folder and laid it in front of her. Then, one by one, he listed his properties. The duplex, the triplex, the warehouse, the silent partner he brought in last year, the capital he raised, the equity he leveraged. He watched their faces, pale by degrees. "This building was bleeding," Mateo said. "You never noticed. But I did. Every night. In the trash you left behind, in the invoices you shredded, in the conference calls you forgot were still playing when I came in to clean." Halverson stood. "You won't get away with this." "Already have," Mateo replied. He leaned forward slightly. "I'll be in the owner's suite downstairs if you want to talk about lease renewal. But I'll warn you, the rent's going up, and I charge late fees now." He turned and walked out. Behind him the room stayed silent. One by one they turned to the documents, notarized, stamped, sealed. Ruiz Ventures, owner. Mateo stood in a... The owner's suite, once a bland, unused guest office space, now completely his. He hadn't brought in a flashy desk or gold-plated anything. Just a clean walnut table, one framed photo of his late wife Rosa, and a folded U.S. flag from his brother's funeral, who never made it past the border crossing. He kept it simple. Professional, intentional because he knew the real power wasn't in flaunting wealth. It was in being unmistakably permanent. He was reading over the building's security audit when the knock came. It wasn't firm. It wasn't entitled. It was nervous. Mateo opened the door to find Langston, holding a clipboard and the kind of tight-lipped smile reserved for forced apologies. "Mr. Ruiz," she said, her tone a bit too high. "May I speak with you?" He let the pause sit, just long enough for her to feel it, then nodded. "Come in." She stepped inside, glancing around as if expecting to see exposed pipes or cobwebs. When she didn't, her shoulders stiffened. "This is a lovely office," she said carefully. "It's quiet," Mateo replied, sitting. "What can I do for you?" Langston hesitated, then set the clipboard down. "I'd want to apologize for the way I've spoken to you in the past. It was unprofessional, and I didn't know your background." Mateo raised an eyebrow. "And my background didn't change, you just never asked." Her jaw tensed, but she nodded. "Fair enough," she took a breath. "I also wanted to discuss the lease terms. We've reviewed the new rates. It's significantly higher than our current structure." Mateo folded his hands. "Because you've been paying below market value for 4 years, with deferred maintenance and late payments. That ends now." "But we've always managed the building's vendor contracts," she said quickly, reaching for the one card she had left. "Including janitorial." Mateo didn't flinch. "Correct. And those will be evaluated too." She blinked. "You're letting the cleaning crew go?" "No," Mateo said quietly. "I'm promoting them." Langston tilted her head. "I've already brought in my team to restructure the vendor pipeline. The same workers, the ones who scrubbed gum off your conference chairs, they'll now be part of the building staff, with health care, paid, leave, their own manager." He leaned forward slightly. "I know what they're worth because I used to be one of them." Langston swallowed. "I see." Mateo stood, gently closing the folder on his desk. "If your firm wishes to remain a tenant, I'm happy to provide a transitional rate for 90 days. After that, you're welcome to bid for other space elsewhere." He opened the door. Langston hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. "Oh," he added. "And Ms. Langston." She turned. "Next time you need to speak with me, please knock." She gave a brittle nod and walked off, heels clicking across the hardwood, in a rhythm that no longer sounded like power. That evening, Rooftop Mateo stood alone at the top of the tower, the city lights glowing like scattered embers beneath a dusky, blue sky. The wind tugged gently at his jacket. He could see the diner down on Marston, where he used to pore over spreadsheets until his eyes burned. He could see the bus stop where he'd waited in the rain with a thermos and a dream. And he could see himself, the version of him that once wiped mirrors so clean he could see his reflection and wonder if it would ever matter. Now it did, a buzz in his pocket. It was a message from one of the janitorial staff. "Mateo, thank you. I just signed my daughter up for health insurance. First time ever." He smiled softly, his hand resting on the rooftop rail. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. The next few weeks passed like slow, deliberate tides. Nothing dramatic, but everything changing. Tenants who used to brush past Mateo in the lobby now gave strained half smiles. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others tried too hard. One even called him Sir, and he'd nearly laughed from the surprise of it. But Mateo didn't return the awkward energy. He wasn't bitter. He just moved, steadily, purposefully, like a man who had nothing to prove and everything already in motion. Still, not everyone took the shift well. Some tenants pushed back on the lease restructuring. One boutique marketing firm packed up overnight, leaving behind unpaid fees and sticky notes with passive-aggressive complaints about hostile new ownership. Mateo didn't argue. He simply filed their vacancy, listed the space and had it leased again in 3 days. This time to a non-profit startup, run by 2 black women focused on immigrant legal aid. When Halverson found out, he stormed into the main lobby. "This isn't the kind of crowd we want in this building," he growled. Mateo looked up from the security renovation documents he was reviewing near the front desk. "You don't own the building anymore," he said calmly. "So it's not your call." Halverson stepped forward, red-faced. "You're just a janitor playing landlord. You think some silent auction makes you an executive?" Mateo smiled, quiet, unbothered. "No," he replied, "but the mortgage, the deed, the new security cameras, the tenant satisfaction score, and the full building occupancy do." That made Halverson flinch. Then the elevator dinged behind them. It opened to reveal Mrs. Goldman, a longtime tenant and the oldest attorney on the 17th floor, a woman who used to smile at Mateo when no one else did, who once left him a banana, bread loaf at Christmas even when the others sneered. She saw the tension and walked up slowly. "Is everything all right here?" she asked. Mateo glanced at Halverson, then back to her. "Just finalizing lease updates." Her eyes twinkled. "Good. You're running this place better than the last 5 combined." Halverson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mrs. Goldman looked at him. "You used to walk past him like he wasn't even here. Funny how the floor plan changes. When the foundation shifts, isn't it?" She nodded once at Mateo, then stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Mateo turned back to Halverson. "Anything else?" Halverson muttered something under his breath and walked off. Later that week, conference hall 3rd floor, Mateo stood behind the podium, nerves tucked deep beneath his steady tone. He wasn't used to this kind of spotlight, fluorescent lit, boardrooms, rows of chairs, media flashes, but the local Chamber of Commerce had insisted. The immigrant investor who revived LangCorp Tower. He'd agreed on one condition, that the janitorial team be listed on the thank you slide. His speech wasn't flashy. He didn't use buzzwords. He didn't open with jokes. He spoke the way he cleaned, deliberate, thorough, honest. "I came to this country with a degree no one recognized, a voice few listened to, and a job that most people walked around without ever seeing, but I watched. I learned. I studied your systems until I understood how to build something that would outlast resentment and arrogance. I cleaned your offices. Now I collect your rent, and I don't say that for revenge. I say that to remind every invisible worker in this country that they are never powerless. You don't need to scream to be strong. You just need to move with purpose and keep the receipts." When he stepped down from the stage, the applause didn't come fast. It built slowly like a tide again, one clap at a time, rising and rising until even the skeptics had to stand. Someone called his name from the back, a young man in a maintenance uniform, eyes shining. Mateo nodded at him. He saw himself in that boy, and he hoped the boy saw his future in him. There was one thing Mateo knew better than anyone in that building, how people behaved when they thought no one was watching. And now they were watching him. For the first time since the acquisition, the LangCorp executive team had formally requested a sit-down, a meeting, to discuss continuity of partnership, they said in the email, as if they hadn't tried to freeze him out of conference rooms for the past decade. Mateo agreed. He told them they could use their usual boardroom, but he would bring the agenda. Monday, 9 a.m., executive boardroom, 22nd floor, the same glass walls, the same long table. But the dynamic was unrecognizable. Mateo arrived precisely on time, flanked by 2 young associates from his real estate legal team, both former interns he'd personally mentored through community college scholarships. They wore confidence like armor, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp. Across the table sat Halverson, Langston, and the last few holdouts of the old guard. Their suits looked stiff, their smiles even stiffer. "Mr. Ruiz," Langston began, overly cordial, Thank you for taking the time. We're hopeful this meeting can reset the tone. Mateo gave a small nod. Reset is a good word. Halverson tried to assert himself. We've reviewed the lease revisions and frankly they're aggressive. We've been tenants here for almost a decade. You've also delayed payments for 6 of those years, Mateo said smoothly, flipping open a folder, and violated 4 terms of your janitorial contract by underfunding essential services, including toilet paper inventory if we want to be specific. Langston shifted in her chair. Halverson's jaw twitched. We had a working relationship with the previous building manager, who defaulted on his commercial mortgage, Mateo cut in. I believe that's why we're having this conversation. One of Mateo's associates slid a packet across the table. These are your new lease terms. Fair market value with an option to extend for 18 months. After that, renewal will depend on tenant performance. Performance? Halverson scoffed. Are you grading us like children now? No, Mateo said, calm and steel-eyed. I'm holding you to the same standard you used to hold everyone else to. Clean, prompt, and respectful. I believe you once sent an employee home for missing a dress code note. Langston paled. Consider this your dress code, Mateo said, tapping the packet. The room fell silent. Then he added almost gently, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to run this building right. You can stay. But the rules have changed. That's the reality. His team stood. Langston finally whispered, We'll review the documents. Mateo nodded once. Please do. As he stepped out of the room, he noticed the interns following him didn't just look proud. They looked fired up, like they'd just witnessed something they never thought possible. Later, that day downstairs, Lobby Mateo walked past the front desk where the new receptionist Vanessa smiled warmly. Mr. Ruiz, she said, just letting you know the new tenant for the 14th floor is arriving tomorrow, Youth Mentorship Org. They asked if you'd like to do the welcome tour yourself. Mateo paused, then smiled. I'd be honored. He walked toward the elevators and noticed a young boy near the front entrance, maybe 11, waiting with a parent. He was staring up at the LED sign that still read LangCorp Tower. Mateo approached the guard booth and nodded. Let's get that changed by end of week. To what, sir? Mateo didn't hesitate. The Ruiz building. The boy looked over, eyes wide, and for the first time someone who had grown up mopping these very floors saw his name going up in lights. The letters came down on a Friday morning. A cherry picker rose slowly against the dawn, its engine humming as the last of the LangCorp sign was unbolted and lowered carefully to the sidewalk. Some employees paused on the plaza, watching as the Hayes final P dangled, then dropped with a dull metallic clang into the waiting truck bed. By noon, new letters were going up. Ruiz. 5 bold, simple letters in brushed steel, clean and unpretentious. But to those who knew, who watched, who whispered along the edges of cubicles and conference rooms, those 5 letters meant something had shifted forever. A janitor's name had replaced a corporate dynasty, and it hadn't been given. It had been earned, mop, breath, and backbone at a time. Inside the lobby, 2:05 p.m. Mateo stood just beneath the scaffold, watching the workers affix the final Z. He wasn't alone. His full building staff stood with him, not in uniforms, in regular clothes, pressed shirts, polished shoes, hair brushed. They looked like a team now, not a crew. A staff, a unit with a purpose. Mateo turned to them. Want you all to see this, he said. Because that name up there, it's not just mine. It belongs to every person who ever got up early, stayed late, and did the work no one noticed. They nodded, some with tears, others just silently clutching each other's hands. Mrs. Torres, the elevator cleaner who spoke only a few words of English, pressed a hand to her heart. Mateo gave a small smile. This is your building now, too. Upstairs, executive wing, The new non-profit on the 14th floor was settling in, boxes half unpacked, laughter echoing down the hallway. A group of college-aged interns was walking around wide-eyed, pointing at the open concept layout. Mateo arrived to give the welcome tour just as promised. He shook hands, introduced himself, walked them through the tenant perks. At the end, one of the interns, a shy, bespectacled girl with a soft southern accent, lingered behind. "Mr. Ruiz?" He turned. "Yes?" She hesitated. Then, "My dad used to clean offices too, back in Alabama. He never got promoted, never got health insurance. They called him just the janitor. He died last year from untreated diabetes." Her voice wavered. "I just wanted to say, this matters. What you're doing here, to people like us, it matters more than you know." Mateo didn't say anything right away. He simply nodded, solemn, quiet, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not just about me owning the building," he said. "It's about changing who feels like they belong inside it." She smiled through her tears. Late evening. Rooftop the city glowed beneath a deep violet sky, and Mateo stood at the edge of the rooftop garden, a small plaque in his hand. Just installed. In loving memory of Rosa Elena Ruiz, you taught me to dream and mop at the same time. He knelt, ran his hand gently along the engraving. A breeze stirred the leaves, then a voice behind him. "You still come up here, huh?" Mateo turned to see Daryl, the night shift security guard, one of the first to treat him like a human being, back in the early days, who used to sneak him hot coffee from the front desk after everyone else went home. Mateo smiled. "Some habits don't change." Daryl approached, looking out over the city. "I'll be real with you, man, I never saw this coming. Not because you weren't smart, you always were, but because folks like us, we never get the shot." Mateo shrugged. "Sometimes you have to stop waiting for permission." Daryl let out a low whistle. "And now your name's lit up on the skyline. You gonna start acting like the big boss?" Mateo chuckled. "Not my style." Daryl looked at him sideways. "Still carry your old mop in the trunk?" Mateo grinned. "Of course. Some tools you don't throw away." They stood there a while longer, watching the glow of the new Ruiz sign reflecting off the windows of the buildings around them. No billboards. No press releases. Just presence, earned, quiet, permanent. 1 year later, Community Job Fair, the Ruiz building. The lobby looked different now. The glossy black floors were polished to a quiet shine, but it was the people who changed the space. Interns welcomed visitors with warm smiles. Local high school students checked in at the front desk for workshops on real estate, finance, and vocational training. The air buzzed, not with urgency or superiority, but possibility. Mateo stood near the entrance in a charcoal blazer, not designer. Just clean, sharp, and unbothered by flash. A large banner hung across the atrium. "Work is dignity, dreams deserve floors to stand on." Mateo Ruiz, his words, his truth. Across the room, Ms. Langston walked through the crowd, clipboard in. Hand now coordinating building services. She had stayed, quietly, gradually, a little less brittle now, a little more human. She'd requested to stay on after the lease renegotiation on Mateo's terms, and she was learning. Humility had been a slow climb, but she was climbing. And Mateo, he gave her the chance because that's what second chances are. Not something you ask for, something you earn back. Upstairs, 20th floor. Mateo stood in the executive wing, watching, as two young men, both sons of janitors, signed their first business rental lease. One planned to start a bilingual IT services firm. The other, a media production agency focused on telling immigrant stories. They didn't know all the codes yet, didn't have the best suits, but they had hunger, and Mateo saw himself in them. So clearly it made his throat tighten. As they shook his hand, one of them said, "Can't believe we're going to work in a place like this." Mateo smiled. "One day you'll own places like this." They looked at each other, half laughing, not sure if he was serious. He was. Later that evening, Janitor's closet, sub-basement. The door hadn't been opened in a year. Mateo walked down alone, key in hand, past the humming pipes and concrete walls. The scent of bleach and floor wax still hung faintly in the air. Inside the closet, everything was just as he'd left it. The mop bucket, the spray bottles, the old radio that never quite tuned in right. He stood in the small space, the room, where he used to fold in his pride and talk to Rosa's photo taped to the wall, and took one last deep breath. Then slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a bronze plaque. He drilled it gently into the wall above the mop hook. This room was once a sanctuary. Here stood a dreamer. Here began a legacy. M.R. He stepped back, turned off the light, closed the door behind him. 1 week later, city skyline. At dusk, the building glowed, not just from the name at the top, Ruiz shining in quiet defiance, but from the inside out. There was light in the halls now. Not just electric. Human people who used to clean after hours were now running departments. Former temps were now full-time. Youth from the very neighborhoods he came from were now walking into offices they never believed they'd belong. And Mateo. He sat by the rooftop garden bench, looking out toward the edge of the city, fingers gently clasping a worn keychain that had once opened the sub-basement door. It didn't matter where it led anymore. He had already unlocked everything. He came here for and left the door open behind him. For others.